I really enjoyed it. I mean, there were times when it was difficult, there were times when there were ups and downs and things going wrong, but I enjoyed every minute of it because it's just the sort of thing that suits me. Krishna somehow gave me a service to do that I really loved doing. I like writing, I like sorting things out, I like working with computers.
Episode 19 of Successful Vaishnavas, Witness to a Temple, the history of Sri Sri Radha Giridhari in Auckland, New Zealand, with Madri Devi Dasi.
It's time to get inspired. Join us as we celebrate devotee success stories. Preaching, business, community development, leadership and personal growth, all from the point of view of Krishna Consciousness. Our goal? To help you to make your life successful.
Hare Krishna, this is Krishnendu Das back again with another episode of the Successful Vaishnavas podcast. Today we'll be speaking with Madri Devi Dasi, who spent many years of her life collecting information all about the Hare Krishna movement in Auckland, and she spent 3 years of her life specifically compiling it together and doing research, specifically to write the book. So it'll be fascinating to hear the adventures, the process that she went through to publish this book, and the kind of reciprocation that she got from doing that service. The interview was actually recorded about, I'm not sure how many, a few years ago. So it's taken me a little while to publish it, but I'm sure you'll find that the information in the interview is timeless and just as relevant as ever. So just before we get into the interview, we'll just do a little recap. There's not too much to report since the last podcast. It took a little longer to get it out last time than I hoped. Once again, it's the training process, and sometimes it takes a little longer than you expect to get things going, but we'll gradually get into the routine, and hopefully we can get these episodes out every week. One exciting thing is I've been interviewing a bunch of devotees. We had a couple of interviews this week with devotees who will be featuring on the podcast. I also spoke to some of the Empower and Preach members, which was really inspiring to hear the preaching that they're doing. And I also spoke with a couple of devotees who I'm working with to help them to design and market their online courses. So that's really exciting, and I hope to give you some more information about that. So it was great to hear from some new devotees who are heading in this area, as well as, of course, I've been working with Srila Prabhupada, and I'm looking forward to interviewing him very soon as well. We're just trying to find the right time to present an interview, and we're also hoping to set up a podcast to do with relationships, specifically devotee relationships, that Vimala and Jayashila are getting ready as well. So that's another exciting thing that's in the works. If you are interested in being interviewed, or if you know someone who would make a great interview, please get in touch with me or put me in touch with them. The easiest way to do it is just go to successfulvaishnavas.com, then go to the contact page, and on that contact page you can either send me a message through the contact form, or you can directly book yourself into my calendar so that we can meet on Skype and have an interview straight away, and you can just add some notes to it, give me an introduction about what you'd like to discuss in that interview. So either way, please get in touch. Whether you want to have an interview that we can put on the podcast to perhaps promote something that you're doing, or if you're interested in developing online courses and promoting them, you can also get in touch with me and we can discuss how I might be able to help you with that as well. So, what else is there to say? We're looking forward to opening up the membership for Empower and Preach shortly. We've opened it up once already, and this will be the second time, because we're ready to bring some new members in to help build up the community there. So if you'd like to be part of that, again, go to successfulvaishnavas.com, and then on the homepage there's 4 different coloured buttons. You can choose which fits your particular interest the most, and then you can sign up to be put on the waiting list for the Empower and Preach membership when it opens up again. In other news, something I haven't mentioned in the previous podcast is I'm quite excited that in a few months' time, for the first 2 weeks of October, I'm actually taking my 2 sons to India for the first time, which is really exciting. I can't believe it's taken this long before I've actually got to take my kids there. My eldest son is already 11, but somehow or other that's how long it's taken, and I'm really looking forward to going with them. Another reason why it's so exciting is it's not just myself and my 2 sons, but actually they're going along with 4 of their friends and their fathers. So it's going to be a really great fathers and sons sort of bonding experience. We're really looking forward to that trip. We'll be spending a week in Mayapur and a week in Vrindavan, and I'm looking forward to meeting some Empower and Preach members while I'm there, hopefully. I was talking with one devotee the other day, and he's going to see if he can arrange it so that we can meet in person. So that'll be really, really great. If you live in India, or if you think that you might be in India in the first 2 weeks of October, as I say, we'll be in Mayapur for the first week and Vrindavan in the second week. And I'd love to meet you. Yeah, that's about it for me this week. Let's get straight into the interview with Madri Devi Dasi and hear what the experience is like of writing a Krishna Conscious book, and what some of the challenges might be, what some of the you might maybe it's simpler than you thought to do this type of thing. In any case, have a listen, and maybe you'll get inspired to also write a Krishna Conscious book. So without further ado, let's have a listen to the interview with Madri Devi Dasi. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. It's my privilege today to be with Madri Devi Dasi. She's one of the stalwart devotees at New Varshan in Auckland. And she's been around for a long time and seen a lot of things. And she thought it would be a great idea to write a book chronicling, or basically telling the story of how the amazing new temple that we have today, how it all came about. So I guess the first question is, what made you feel like writing a book on this topic?
Hare Krishna. Well, it was a matter of having to, really, because over the years, I've been 30 years with the temple now, and I'm a hoarder. I collected so much information while I was working there at the temple, sometimes as a secretary, sometimes as a bookkeeper, and writing magazines and so many things like that. I had all this information, and I never throw anything out. Also boxes and boxes of photographs. So it came to me that really it should be put together for the history of the temple somehow. And I began to think how I could do that.
All right, so I guess at that point you decided that writing a book would be the best way to share the story.
Yes, and it all came together really because I've always loved computers. I love writing on a computer, and I'd done the folk magazine in the temple, which I'd kept going for quite a lot of years, so it had all the stories about devotees' activities and what was happening and how the temple was gradually being built. So I feel all the way along it's Krishna's arrangement that's brought me to this point of writing a book, because I'd always loved working with computers and writing. I did many years ago when I was at university in the 1950s. I studied mathematics and worked for a while in the applied maths lab in Wellington with computers, the very first computer in Wellington.
That must have been quite large, I imagine.
Well, the first one was quite small because it was on a table. It was an analog computer that you worked by turning handles. But then we went on from that to the punched card machines, Power Samus and things. And then I went and worked in London for a while on the very big ones, which were as big as a football field.
Wow.
And we did our own binary programming at that stage. So I worked in London for a few years, then came back to New Zealand. And since I loved computers, I bought the very first one that was available for ordinary people. And that was the little VIC-20, the Commodore VIC-20. So it's just been a love of mine to write on a computer and to make things happen like that and put them together. So somehow Krishna put all that ability to use, and I started sorting out all the information and trying to work out how to write a book. I had no idea how to write a book, but I looked on good old Google and found a lot about self-publishing, and it explained, how you could go about it and eventually make your PDF and send it off to a printer. So that's sort of how it happened, but I've learnt a lot along the way and made a lot of mistakes and leaned on my wonderful editor, Krishna Rupa, in Australia, Prabhupada disciple, who Hari Sori actually suggested that I get a good editor, and I've actually depended on her. She's taught me so much about editing and how to put your commas and your apostrophes and when to use which and when to use that, and not to put two spaces at the end of after a comma, and so many things that you have to learn when you're writing a book. So that's how it all came together.
So once you got the idea to write the book, and then you Googled about self-publishing, I mean, what was the process that you went through, in terms of getting all that material together that you had and basically preparing the book?
Yes, well, I remember I first, I got a large exercise book and headed it up for the years when when ISKCON started in Auckland, 1972. So I had one page for 72, 73, 74, and I began to write things that I'd heard or found or discovered of what happened in each of those years. And I did a lot of research online too, about the Prabhupada disciples that were there at the time, the early disciples. So I got it all sorted out into years. And then I contacted a lot of the early devotees to see if they could give me their stories and their memories from the old days. And some of them were very helpful, and some of them I couldn't find, and some of them didn't want to help.
Really?
So it was quite an interesting endeavor, but I did get a lot of good stories which are in the book. And I discovered a lot that I didn't know about those days because, of course, I didn't ever meet Prabhupada. I was in Auckland, but at that time I was going to the Christian church, and I wasn't interested in Hare Krishna. In fact, I used to tell my family, don't go near those funny people on the street, don't take a book, don't take a sweet, don't go near them, which didn't stop them, of course. Two of my daughters brought all the literature back home and when they were at university, and two of them joined up before me. So anyway, I've gradually researched the early days, and also some of those early devotees sent me pictures, photographs, and told me so much about the days when Prabhupada was there. He came 3 times to Auckland, 72, 73, and 76. And we don't have much on film, though, because one of the early devotees, Bhajanabi, he was the photographer at the time, and he did make some videos, but then he traveled to America, and he had everything in car, and it was all stolen.
Oh, no.
So we're one of the few temples that Prabhupada visited that doesn't have a video. We have about half a dozen photographs very poor photographs of Prabhupada, and that's all we have.
Wow. But you've got a lot of photographs of other things that happened. This book that you've got's got a lot of photographs of the history, hasn't it? How many photos are there? Do you remember?
Well, there's 300 photographs in the book on 150 pages. And yes, so that's worked out quite well that we have collected a lot.
Yeah, so you've got it all sorted into these different years, and what was the next stage of sort of turning that into a book?
Well, I just started trying to write the beginning of it. And I remember doing that when I was on holiday at a cottage that our family has up at Kawau Island, and I just sat and tried to think, how would I make the opening interesting? And I thought, well, actually, this is when Sri Sri Radha Giridhari came to Auckland at the same time as Prabhupada's first visit. So it's the story of Radha Giridhari, our beautiful deities in Auckland, how they came and how they lived with us and saw everything we were doing until we eventually built them their beautiful temple after a lot of struggles. So the whole book is Radha Giridhari's story. So the beginning of it starts with them being found in Jaipur, which was quite an amazing story in itself, and you'll have to read the book to find out what happens then, because it was quite interesting how they were discovered in Jaipur by Tushta Krishna and Bajanabi at that time. That was the beginning of the book. And off and on, it just sort of grew after that. Sometimes nothing happened for a while, and then I'd think about it a bit more. I did a lot of it at night, just lying in my bed and thinking. And I always had a piece of paper beside my bed, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night and write something. And then gradually put it onto the computer and sort it out.
So it sounds like it was your constant meditation in the background of things that were going on, how to write this book. And
for 3 years it was like that. It's been, well, it started before 3 years, I think, because I'd been planning it for a long time before that. But for 3 years it's been a pretty, complete and
absorbing
endeavour all that time, which I've enjoyed immensely. I've just loved every minute of it, actually. It's just something that suited me because I like writing, I like researching, I like talking to devotees and finding things out and sorting things out.
I'm interested in the whole process. So it sounds like you collected everything into these different years, and then you started at the beginning. So did you write the book like chronologically, or you got sort of inspiration and sort of more at random, and you kind of put it together like that?
Yes, a lot of it was in sections, and then I'd have to bring them together later on into order. But it's mostly chronological. I was very lucky that because I had been doing the folk magazine at the temple for a long time, so I could use all those stories that were in it. Of course, that's only when we were at New Varshan. The earlier part, when the devotees lived in small houses in central Auckland, that I had to hear from other devotees. The early devotees like Bhakta Barry, Balaram, and Bhadra and Narayan. They told me so much, and Adwaita and Gauravani. It was very unfortunate that the temple president in the early days, most of the time in Auckland, was Yashomati Nandana. And I had emailed him for stories, and he was very keen on the idea. In fact, he said he had thought of writing a book himself. And he got very encouraged about it, and he said he would come over and stay here in Auckland and work on the book with me. We were going to do that, and then he developed his cancer problem and got very ill. And before he was able to come here, he passed away.
Mm.
So that was very sad, but he had given me quite a lot of stories before he left.
That's good. I guess that's one of the reasons why you've written this book, is that, devotees don't live forever in this, in this body.
Exactly.
And we need to get those stories captured for the future generations before they...
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And I've had quite a lot of feedback since the book was published from the older devotees around the world who've appreciated having the history, so that's good.
Well, yeah, it sounds like a wonderful meditation for you, to be contacting the devotees and looking back through all the good old times, and or the old times, whatever they were.
Yeah.
And so once you, basically got your draft together, what was the next stage after that?
Well, working on the computer and trying to sort it into chapters. I divided it into 2 parts. The part before we moved on to the New Varshan farm, and then afterwards, while we were at New Varshan, building up the community there, and gradually planning the new temple, because the planning for the new temple started in 1983 or 1984. And it was a pretty ambitious project. It was going to be twice as big as it is now. And of course, at that time, the community was thriving, and there was lots of finance available. So we had great plans. But then a few things happened, which you'll hear about and read about in the book, which meant that we had to reduce the plan of the temple quite a lot and give up our ambitious planning a bit. But of course, all the time we were determined to build a wonderful temple for Radha Giridhari. Beautiful deities needed a good place. They were being well served all the time in the little temple at New Varshan, but they needed a big and beautiful temple where more and more people could come and see them. So that all began to happen. But as writing the book, I had to choose how I was going to lay it out. And for a while I was thinking whether I could do it on Microsoft Word or whether that would be good enough. Some experienced devotees were telling me that, not only devotees, but people in the publishing business said that you've got to invest in better software. And they suggested InDesign, which is a very expensive program. And I thought, well, I'm not wanting to spend too much on this, but I've got an old computer. It goes back to 2001, I think, my computer. But it goes very well. And I'm using Microsoft Word 2002, I think. And I said, well, I'll just try and see if it all works. So I put it on and I worked out how to do the layout. And I'd worked a lot with PageMaker before on the magazines, so I was quite, able to do all that work. But I wasn't too good with photographs. And they said, you can't do that on Microsoft Word. You can't put the captions and move pictures around. But, if you go to Microsoft Word and use the help file, it's amazing what you can do. So I've done the whole book with Microsoft Word.
Wow.
And no problem with pictures and the captions. Maybe it was a bit slower than it would have been with InDesign, but it worked out all right. So I saved money on that.
So one of the lessons that I'm getting here is that, like, for example, if another devotee or anyone's thinking of publishing a book, they might think that there's some complicated software, but you can just use Microsoft Word and it's just fine.
You can. Yeah. You definitely can. It may be a little slower, but I'm slow anyway with my thinking and working, and because I'm a bit older now and I can't type properly. I was always going to teach myself how to type, but I haven't, so I just used one finger on each hand.
Really? Amazing.
So I've done the whole book like that.
Amazing.
And so you can do, nothing's impossible, as Prabhupada said. And when you've got a goal to work towards, you can do it, especially if you've got Krishna to help you. I depended on Krishna a lot. When things got tricky, I just prayed to Krishna and prayed to Prabhupada, and he helped me.
As the aeroplane flies above. Just let it pass away. Okay. So you were talking about how you really had to depend on Krishna when times were tough and things like that.
Yes, that's always the way, and it definitely works. But I've done a lot of quite impossible things in my life, and they've worked out. And I've always strived to do something that's really seems too much for me. I remember as a child, I always dreamt of putting elephants in matchboxes, which is quite funny because, the Krishna story about similar things that are difficult to do. But
the elephant through the eye of a needle,
isn't it? Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
And mine was putting elephants in matchboxes. And for many years I had nightmares and thinking about that. And it carried on through the times when I was being asked to do difficult things at the temple, and before that, when I was at university, and everything was very difficult too. And I could tell you a lot about my early days, but I won't bother. But things worked out, and it was the book. It did seem to be a very huge endeavour, but in the end, it worked out, and I've put the elephants into the matchboxes.
Yeah, so what were some of those challenges that you faced, publishing the book? I'm sure they fit into different categories.
Yeah. Well, the computer crashed a couple of times. That wasn't too good, but I had to get a new hard drive and do a few things.
Did you have a good backup, or you lost some information?
No, I backed up everything. That was okay. I didn't lose anything. But it just became such a big project, but bigger than I thought. I mean, it's a big book.
How many pages is it?
406 pages.
Yeah.
And 150 pages of photos. And it just became, many times it became too big for me. And then I had trouble finding the publisher too, because I did that on Google. I found a publisher who seemed very keen to do it, but when they discovered how many photos there were, they couldn't do it. And I was all set to send them the PDFs and everything, but then it didn't work out. However, Google again, I found another one in Auckland, which was very good and helped me a lot. And of course, I've had Dinabandhu, our wonderful artist in Auckland, here to help me with the planning of the cover of the book, and some good advice on the layout and the different font that you choose and everything like that.
So it sounds like one of the challenges, and I think that this is something that anyone will face, that, like you say, has some big goals, they want to try to achieve the impossible, is that sometimes it seems to be too much. So how did you manage that? Like, did you break it down into small parts, or, how did you kind of deal with the fact that it's such a big project and it was overwhelming sometimes?
Well, there were many times when I just sat and thought, how am I going to do this? What can I do? I had papers laid out all over the floor of my living room, and I didn't know where to start or where to put things together. But again, I turned to praying to Prabhupada, please help me. I don't think you can put that bit in.
That sounds good.
I don't know.
So it was just basically having that desire, not giving up, and praying to Prabhupada for guidance, like what's the next step?
Yes, I'm not good at giving up. I got a bit of a reputation at the temple for not giving in sometimes when there were difficult times.
Well, I'm just thinking it's so appropriate that you would write the book about opening the temple, because through all the years you were the one that said, let's do it, let's get that temple built.
Well, I did get a bit of a reputation for that, which... but the book, the title of the book, I had a lot of fun trying to think of a title for the book. And it's partly that I was there and saw the temple being built. And I don't live on the temple property. I live next door, so it's a rather strange situation that I'm a little bit outside of the temple. I can see what's going on. I can take an interest in all the activities of the devotees, but I'm not sort of under the complete control of the temple. So I was witnessing everything that was going on. I was thinking of different titles for the book, but they didn't quite seem so suitable. And then I remembered the children's book, the witness for a wedding.
Right, the Shakshi Gopal story.
Yeah, and I thought, well, then witness. And I thought, well, actually the real witness to this temple being built is Radha Giridhari. So it's their story. And they're the witnesses to the temple. And I thought that might be a nice title.
Yeah, it sounds good.
For the book.
Yeah. So what advice would you have for a devotee in particular who's thinking of writing a book? It sounds like it's a big endeavor. We don't want you to put anyone off here by the hard work required or whatever. But
no, it's great fun. I really enjoyed it. I mean, there were times when it was difficult. There were times when there were ups and downs and things going wrong. But I enjoyed every minute of it because it's just the sort of thing that suits me. Krishna somehow gave me a service to do that I really loved doing. I like writing. I like sorting things out. I like working with computers. And I'm sure anybody who would feel they could start writing a book, once they get into it, they'll find it's very enjoyable, great fun, very rewarding. So I did, advise anybody to have a go. And it is important to write a history of things that might be forgotten.
Yeah, I imagine that there's these kind of stories all around the world of devotees' activities and adventures, and it would be a shame for it to be lost.
It's very true. I mean, I've had so much feedback on this now, quite a lot, and several of the old devotees have said, oh, they'd forgotten that story. They were there, but they'd forgotten it, and it all brought it back. And even some have said about the beginning of the book, that they never understood what was going on with the groups in Auckland.
Right, the sort of behind-the-scenes things that they might not have known about.
It explained the history so well to them. So I was happy to hear that.
Yeah, one thing I was just wondering is, was there any time when it was tricky to present it? Because I imagine people have got different versions of what happened, right?
Well, I haven't had any adverse criticisms yet. But I was careful not to. There were some events in the history of the Auckland Yatra that weren't so pleasant. Things that happened, that there were arguments between people, there were disagreements, and but I've sort of talked about all the good things mostly in the book.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously there were some dissensions at some times, but it all worked out in the end, and the book finishes with the opening of the temple, where everything was. It was a very, very happy time, and everybody was cooperating nicely.
The opportunity for the next chapter for someone else to write.
Well, I don't think there needs to be another chapter really for a long time. The temple has been very successful. The congregation has built up tremendously. The whole community is doing very well.
Yeah, so it is a very natural, I'm not sure what you'd say, but sort of completion for this book, that the deities arrived in Radha Giridhari arrived here in Auckland, and they went through so many things, and then finally they've been given a wonderful temple which they'll be staying in for many years to come.
Exactly, it's their story, and they've been quite aware of my writing the book. I've told them about it all the time, and whenever I go to the temple at Arti, I tell them what I'm doing. So, they've been with me all the time.
And so this book can be found at witnesstoatemple.info, and if you just Google Witness to a Temple, it'll come up straight away. And that's where devotees can find the book too.
It's on Facebook too. It's got its own Facebook page.
Okay, so Witness to a Temple Facebook page.
Yeah.
And that's where you can find out the information if you're interested in buying it. And I highly recommend it, because maybe you're thinking of opening a temple. This will give you a bit of insight into what it takes. And it's just wonderful to hear about devotees and their adventures and their accomplishments. And this is one book that really highlights that, a classic example of that. So thank you very much, Madri. I really enjoyed hearing about how you wrote this book, and I look forward to continuing to read the history of this place that I've been living in and finding out a lot of secrets that I didn't know before.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So there you have it, the interview with Madri Devi Dasi. I hope you found that as inspiring as I did. I forgot to mention that Madri is over 80 years old. She's not quite ready to have her phone call from the Queen, but she's certainly a lot older than most of the devotees in the Hare Krishna movement these days. And it's incredible the amount of energy that she's got for different projects that she's done, in particular this book. And it's a fabulous book, as you would have heard in the interview, describing about how Sri Sri Radha Giridhari was first discovered, how they revealed themselves in Jaipur, how they came to New Zealand, installed by Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada's visits to Auckland, the conflict that was going on, the different groups that were competing with each other in New Zealand was quite an interesting thing that happened. And then, of course, finally, after some delays, the temple was finally opened, and that concludes the book. There's so many interesting details in there. I highly recommend getting that book. It's available, I believe it's available on Amazon. It's certainly available on Fishpond, which is a local publishing company. If you go to successfulvaishnavas.com/19, I'll put the link there. If you're interested in getting the book, you can click on the link and you'll be able to buy the book. And you'll be able to see which place would be suitable depending where you're living in the world. But once again, I highly recommend the book. And I also recommend, if you haven't done so already, joining the Successful Vaishnavas mailing list so that we can keep in touch with you, let you know whenever a new episode of the podcast comes out, or if we have any products or any events that are coming up. So go to successfulvaishnavas.com and you'll be able to sign up there. And especially if you're interested in joining the Empower and Preach membership, go and join the waiting list there, because as I mentioned, of course, it depends when you hear this podcast, but at the time of this podcast, which is May 2018, we're just about to open up the membership to new members shortly. So go ahead and join the waiting list for that membership. So we'll leave it at that, and I look forward to sharing some more great interviews and some insights with you in future episodes. Until then, make your life successful. Hare Krishna.
Thanks for listening. To find out more, go to successfulvaishnavas.com.
Whatever little service that anyone can do for Krishna is to be appreciated and celebrated.
Just give this life to Krishna.
We know that they have much more potential than they're presently using.
I went to a place of relishing the activity and letting go of the result completely.
You just associate with pure devotees. Then you shall be able to cross over the ocean of nescience.